We're rolling.
When inflation got you pushing all these boulders up bigger hills and you're looking at the future, tuition's giving you the chills, but they're all frills on social. You're looking for something real. Don't break down. Let's break it down over a meal. This is the Brunch and Budget podcast with your hosts, Pamela Capalad, a certified financial planner and accredited financial counselor, founder of Brunch and Budget, Pockets Change, and Sea Change. She's here to take the bite out of your budget.
And your other host, Dialect, the director of pedagogy at Pockets Change and co-founder of Sea Change. He's here to change the way we talk about finance.
Recorded live-ish from Greenhouse Studios deep in the heart of Planet Brooklyn. You gotta know when to brunch it. Know when to budget. Know when to walk away. I don't know. We're double down. I didn't have an ending for that one. What's going on, y'all? It's the Brunch and Budget podcast.
Hello. I am Pam, and today we are talking about, I kind of want to timestamp today because the numbers that we are sharing may be old when you listen to it, but the concepts are the same. So we're recording this in September 2022. The inflation report for August 2022 just came out.
Yeah, we're all excited about it, worried about what was going to be the numbers. It's a whole thing
There
now.
was a lot of optimistic economists out there who are like, oh, inflation's hit its peak. We're good. It's going to go down next month.
Man, folks were waiting for that like it was the new NBA salary cap.
God, I know. Well,
remember when like sports stuff was the only stuff that we like were stressed about when it came into like finances? Those were the only guys you heard talking about, or like movie stuff that didn't have to do with you. Like, oh, you heard this movie had a $200 million budget? Oh wow, I hope it makes its budget back. And now we're like, I hope the country can make its budget back.
Oh my God, I hope the inflation rate is going down.
Right. Remember when you didn't care about inflation like that? Like only
Well, it's been a while.
I know that you don't remember that. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, though. So let's talk about it, right? Because we're going to talk. Well, we should probably talk about what inflation is first. But just to give you the news, the inflation rate in August was 8.3%, which went up 0.1% compared to July. So it was 8.2% in July. It's 8.3% in August.
And folks are freaking out because of the projections, right? It was supposed to be going down.
Yeah, because we were seeing gas prices go down. But what they didn't take into account were food prices and rent prices were still going up. And inflation is calculated by this thing called the Consumer Price Index, which takes into account all of the common things that people spend money on and then sees if the prices are rising. So what is inflation, right? Let's start there.
Because what you're talking about an aggregate score now, and gas prices aren't the thing, and like let's wheel it back.
So inflation is the basic concept of inflation is that it refers to prices increasing over time. And there's many reasons for that. We're going to talk about a couple of them in a little bit. But what that basically means is if inflation goes up 2%, then basically if you needed to buy something for $1, then next year with inflation going up 2%, it would cost $1.02.
Yeah, I remember in the movie Half Baked when Willie Nelson was like, I remember when a dime bag cost a dime.
There you go.
It's a weird thing that feels like it's natural, right? Like, well, as there are more people in the world,
more money is generated,
right?
more value.
Stuff gets expensiver.
Yeah, and there are some aspects of it that are probably natural, and there are some aspects of it that are definitely created by the economists.
There's some GMO going on.
I shouldn't say by the economists. There's the Fed. The other thing that's coming out that we're doing this podcast before the actual Fed rates come out. But the way that the Fed tries to control inflation is to increase interest rates. So basically the Fed, the Federal Reserve, is the bank's bank, right? And what happens is the Federal Reserve lends money to banks, so banks can lend money to you, right? But the Fed lends money to banks at a certain interest rate. So if the interest rate is low, if the lending rate is low for the Fed, then the banks will turn around and give you a lower interest rate to buy a car, to buy a house, to take out a credit card, all that stuff, right?
These banks do love you.
Yeah, but only if the Fed rate is low, right?
Right.
But one of the ways that the Federal Reserve tries to curb inflation is to increase their interest rate that they lend money to the banks on. And so the banks, as much as they love you, pass the increased interest rate on to the consumers.
Wow. So, I mean, the whole thing is supposed to, well, it does sound a little natural. It's like an ebb and flow, right?
Yeah. So it's natural. And, there are levers in place to control it when it feels like it's getting uncontrollable, right? And the interest rate for the Fed is one of the ways. Now, the problem with that is because the costs get passed on to the consumer, the people who always get screwed in the end are us, is really the end game, right?
Well,
the banks still get to collect their interest rate. The Fed still gets to collect their interest rate. But it might be too expensive for you to be able to borrow money for a car or to get a mortgage, because when interest rates rise, everything costs more. And so they're saying, well, if everything costs more, then maybe people will stop spending as much money, and that will curb inflation.
But that's not how stuff works.
That's never how
You're like,
stuff
you know
works.
what? If we make these groceries more expensive, they just won't buy these frivolous groceries.
Yeah. If we make borrowing money to buy a car more expensive, then maybe people will buy less cars.
They think that, I'm so tired of folks thinking that we only spend money for silly side things rather than I need to get to work. I need to wear some clothes. I need to wear the clothes that the job told me that I need to wear, and I need to eat enough stuff to get there and back.
Yep. And what's truly shocking about how quickly inflation has risen just over the last several months, right? Like we weren't even thinking about it at the beginning of the year, and then around March, I remember the interest rates for mortgages went up by pretty quickly, by maybe a couple percentage points. It went from 3% to now banks weren't lending unless it was 5%. And then it just escalated from there. And the reason why it feels so shocking is because since 2008, the average inflation rate has been 1.57% per year between 2008 and 2019. If you go to in2013dollars.com, you can find the inflation rate. So that means that $100 in 2008 is equivalent to $118 in 2019, right? So it's not a huge amount. We have not experienced a significant inflation rate, which means that prices were rising incrementally here and there at kind of that natural way that you were talking about,
right.
Dialect. But now we're really seeing the effects of, there's so many reasons people are coming up with: supply chain, the war on Ukraine, all of these things.
It's a lot of stuff that feels like, I think the reason why we're so late to figuring it out, that in these individual areas, we're like, oh, we know the reasons why. Oh, there's a supply chain problem here. Oh, there's a worker shortage here. Or there's something that's specific to the industry, not realizing that all of these are increasing the aggregate.
Well, and then if you see the headlines on the other side, gas companies have made record profits in the last couple quarters. So why is inflation affecting us? Why are the prices getting passed on to us, the higher prices, but they're not showing up in lower profits for the gas companies?
In a time where we have more communication about this stuff than ever. I feel like in the 50s they could have done it and we wouldn't have found out for 30 years.
Right, exactly. But now you're seeing it. You're seeing it every quarter. You're seeing the profits and you're seeing the headlines. But really, so much of the focus, and I will tell you, when press call me and when they ask questions, they're always asking, what can the individual do?
This is why we don't have to worry about whose fault it is and checks and balances, because at the very least, the journalism stuff is not on our side. Maybe in the 50s, there were some intrepid folks who were doing some checking and balancing, so they couldn't just jack it up and not tell anyone.
Yeah, exactly. So, history of inflation over the past 100 years, and this is all from a really great article on the Motley Fool that we'll link to in the show notes, but over the past 100 years, the inflation rate in the U.S. has been around 3.22%, but, inflation has gotten extreme in the U.S. In 1910, inflation was as high as 18%. It's been double digits about 8 times since then. The 70s, I remember, were really high inflation rates, and what that looked like was if you wanted to buy a house, it would cost, your interest rate would be 12% to buy a house, right? So it would be really, really difficult. And low interest rates are also what tend to increase home prices because it's more affordable for people to buy more expensive houses.
Wait. So the interest rate is too high, then there's just too much money, you can't afford it. The interest rate is low, then they're going to jack up the price of the home. And then this double-digit stuff has been happening a bunch of times, so the thing that I said about there used to be checks and balances isn't true neither.
Well, it really depends on. It really depends. The thing is, we should probably cut this part.
Oh, we're going too far down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think we're going too far down the rabbit hole.
Pause the phone.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
I don't know if that's them or not. It seems fast, but
Yeah.
They said they were on their way.
Yeah, I guess we didn't need to go this deep into this.
Yeah.
Hello?
Hi, is this DoorDash?
Yes, I'm down.
Okay, great. Thanks. We'll be down in a sec. Bye.
no problem.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. My bad. We should have talked about this where we were going with the inflation part. Because I was like, where?
Yeah. But I think we can cut from over the past 100 years because I think that's where we started going down the hole.
Okay, yeah. All this stuff was good.
And then I think I just want to go into the two main drivers. To
Yeah,
inflation, the cost push and the demand
I was.
pull.
That's what I didn't want to just ask you because I wasn't sure.
You should just ask me.
I wanted to jump to that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
That's my bad. I was like,
Yeah.
I wanted to be like, so what's this cost? What's the difference? Maybe we can just come in with that.
Yeah, I think so. We can listen back.
Well, we can just jump in and be like, hey, like we can talk about the particulars of it, but like let's talk about what's really making it happen.
Yeah.
We can talk about the cost push.
Oh, thank you.
Cost push.
It'll be our motivation for
push,
finishing
coast.
is eating that, and then we have to move the car, and then we can go right into the
Okay, yeah.
how much is enough.
No, parking around here.
Yeah, we had to park one of those like 2-hour spots because it's
Yeah.
nuts right now.
And then
Yeah.
we'll move it back to now when the Thursday side is
Yeah.
back allowed.
It is it's all a big hassle.
Oh my gosh, the traffic has been nuts. We went to Bushwick yesterday or the other day, and like every street was like lined with traffic cones.
My whole way home from here, like slowly over the past couple months, it was 1 block. Then it was 2 blocks. Now it's like the entire.
Oh my
path
god.
home. Yeah, it's a nightmare.
Yeah, the exit off the BQE is like a hot mess. Whew. Okay. So yeah, so let's just go in. Can you just reel that back?
Yeah, I'm gonna interrupt us.
Do you want to just maybe we don't need to reel it back and you just
Yeah, we
start
don't have
here?
to reel it back.
Yeah, you
If
don't have to
the
reel it
rate
back.
is low, then they're gonna jack up the.
So I'll just
Yeah.
start there, and then Ruth can just.
Yeah,
Yeah, decide
exactly.
where
Ruth
to-
can just cut it. Yep.
All right.
Cool.
We're rolling.
You know what? We can talk about inflation and the particulars and the minutia of it because it's really complicated. But that sounds like another show. That sounds like a different show that maybe we can guest on their show where you'll talk about it.
Yeah.
But like, we want to get practical. So what are the things that make it happen? I know that there's like the two main drivers of inflation. Can we rap
Yes.
about those and see how that goes?
Yeah, and again, this is a Motley Fool article that really talks through really just like two simple ways this happens. One is called cost push inflation. And this is when production costs go up to make certain things, right? So the example they use is if the price of lumber goes up, then that leads to a increase in home prices, that leads to an increase
Right.
in repairs and renovations and building costs and things like that. So it'll cost more to produce the lumber, it'll cost more for the builder to build a home, and then they'll pass the additional cost on to you.
That's the traditional stuff that we know about. Like, oh, there's a shortage or scarcity of something, so now thing is more valuable, it's more expensive. The other stuff that comes from it more expensive.
Well,
Easy.
what's interesting about this is it's the source of the inflation is at the beginning of production, right? The other kind of inflation is called demand pull inflation, and that's where the demand for goods increases. So basically, more people want homes, right? So it's not that the lumber costs have gone up, it's not the cost to build has gone up, but more and more people want to buy homes, and so there's more people who want to buy homes than there are available homes, and that's demand pull inflation. Yeah. So it comes from one end or the other. It comes from either consumers wanting to buy more of something, or it comes from, on the beginning end, production costs going up.
It's so wild because they feel like very different things, but they both make stuff cost more.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. And so right now, we might be seeing both, and this might be why inflation is going up, is the cost of goods is going up, right? We've been hearing about the supply chain for like 2 freaking years.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what the supply chain was until the pandemic, right? And so the cost to produce goods is going up, and also the demand to buy certain goods, especially homes, is also going up.
That's what I'm saying. People know about supply chain metrics the way they remember the trade deal for their favorite
I know.
player.
I'm like, oh my God, why do we know the inflation rate right now? Right?
Wow, the push-pull inflation.
Yeah. So inflation did go up in August. We'll see what happens in September. I think that economists tend to be optimistic because they don't want to see the stock market drop. We also did see a huge drop in the stock market when the inflation report came out.
Yo, what was it? The Dow dropped really hard. Yeah, that's the one that always freaks out. it scares the boomers, right? It's like when the Dow Jones drops, those are the three companies. I know it's not three companies.
30. You're close.
It's the three old
There's like
companies.
Thousands of companies, but the Dow was only 30 of them. But anyway.
It's the ones that people trust, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's like, what is it? It's IBM, it's the Wheel, Fire, all the old stuff. And they're like, if that stuff is going down, we're in trouble. It's just this wild thing where it's like it's 0.1% increase. I get that we are expecting things to go down, but like the thing that freaked out was the stock market, and that's what caused a million think pieces about how everything is going to heck.
That's great perspective, right? Because it's not like inflation increased or doubled in the last month. It's gone up a little bit, right? And we are seeing gas prices go down. The thing that is really difficult, though, is we're not seeing food prices go down or housing prices go down.
Well, so let's start getting into, I think, what the really real of this is. Mm-hmm. Is like inflation is going up and going down and doing this thing and moving around, but it doesn't feel like relief to us at all because of a lot of factors, like you're saying, at the top and at the bottom. Like one thing, I'm going to bring in this study to talk about in a minute, but like one thing that all of the stuff we've been reading about has been saying we have less unemployment going on right now. People are getting jobs and people are getting higher wages. But that's at the bottom. It's not at the middle. So those of y'all who were like in abject poverty, below the poverty line, really not being able to take care of themselves, there were a number of people who are now more able to take care of themselves, and that's great. They're doing better, and these situations have increased. But if you're already making more than minimum wage, but not enough, your rate isn't increasing. They're raising the minimums. Yeah. They're not raising the median of stuff. Yeah,
and they're not. Wages are not increasing with inflation either. I mean, where do you think those record profits from the gas companies came from? They didn't increase wages. They cut expenses, right? And they were collecting more money. Yeah.
It's rough. A next thing about it is a lot of the tertiary markets are also been affected really heavily. It wasn't just the Dow Jones that went down, but the Dow Jones for the young folks, Ethereum and Bitcoin also fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
All of the crypto markets are having a lot of trouble right now. And it's this weird disconnect where there's a big fear of these things, but little is actually changing for most of us.
Yeah, especially from month to month. Like, yes, the big shock, like I said earlier, was that inflation went up so dramatically over the next several months. But right now, it's like, it's inching along, and we don't know what's going to happen next month. So I feel like that. Let's talk about this Politico article that you found.
Yeah, well, I wanted to get into this is one of the big things that's stressful right now about, I don't see things changing in my life, whether it's good or bad. And, we're hearing all these stuff is that there is an inflation wealth divide. And this is something that goes along racial lines. A lot of this stuff is mad new. We read this Politico article that has some, it's got some research. There's this cat, David Argente from Penn State University. I'm prefacing that a lot of this is been brand new in terms of the research, so they're not super sure about their findings.
And I think that's amazing, though, because I know what you're about to go into. Sorry.
I know. You've read the show notes.
I read the show notes. Well,
Pam
the thing
prepared,
is, like,
y'all.
The consumer price index is an average, right? It's a conglomerate of all of these things. And everyone was so shocked to see inflation go up because gas prices went down, but other costs didn't go down.
Yeah, and so what David and I guess this team that was working on this, found that when you look at inflation, certain populations have a different level of inflation based on the goods that they're buying. So like you're saying, gas prices, they start going down. So the people who use a car more often, things are going better for them. But rent prices didn't go down. Grocery prices didn't go down. So for the people who spend a higher percentage of their money on rent, it's still a terrible place for them. And that goes very directly along racial lines. In the findings, Black and Latino households were spending a lot more money. I mean, this, that in general, Black and Latino households spend more money on rent. It also showed the rural versus city divide because in the cities, you're paying a higher percentage. I mean, that's kind of increasing everywhere. But those places where that's happening, that's still been a huge problem for people.
Well, and the other aspect of it, right, is that home ownership for Black and Latinx families is lower than white and Asian families. And so your mortgage payment doesn't go up if inflation goes up because your mortgage payment is fixed, but your rent does go up.
Another interesting aspect of this inflation wealth divide is the financial literacy of it all, where people are like, well, you're not making as much money, so just buy the cheaper product. Buy things online if you can. Well, for people who are already at the margins, they're already buying the cheapest version of stuff. There is no cheaper thing to downgrade to. So they're asked out in that regard.
Yeah.
You can't get the cheaper online thing if it doesn't deliver to your area. Or if the general obstacles of getting online and being able to do that are too much for you, your life, your schedule, and the way that you do things. So there's another area in which there is a divide amongst demographics, even though it seems kind of like it's the same for everybody.
I love it. I love it.
Do you love it? It's not great. It's not great for us.
Oh no, it's not great for us. Sorry, cut that part. I was just, agreeing.
Yes. No, I feel you. So one of the things about it that is really insidious is about employment, right? There was the thing from the Fed, we talked about it on our show, about how they were saying we need unemployment to start going up. We need people to have less jobs.
What was that? The sacrifice ratio.
So one of the positive things that's been going on lately, and I think this has a lot to do with the social programs that people have been enacting, is that there has been a shortening of the employment divide. And there, in the last, I forget the exact range, but like in the last roughly year, there have been more and more Black and Latino folks been getting jobs and have been able to compete with white and Asian workers. So there's been more parity on that end. Now, if you're familiar with hiring practices amongst Black people, there's the familiar phrase of last hired, first fired. And there's this concern that if we do this thing that the Fed is suggesting, that have less jobs available, that's going to destroy all of those gains that are made. That's already starting to happen in some industries, and there's fear that it's going to become more widespread. So again, we have these invisible divides, these ones where everything seems hunky-dory, but as soon as people get into crisis mode, they're going to throw out one demographic rather than, I guess, it's one of those tough decisions like, well, do we spread around the problems or do we make it just one group's problem and then be all right with it? And it's always Black folks. You know how it is.
It always is. Yeah. Yeah. So there's this really great Axios article. And this is, like Dialect was saying, this is all very early, but people haven't looked at the inflation rate in verticals before. And when I say verticals, I mean between gas prices, food, and rent, and then across racial lines. And so Axios had this really great article where, they just started this in 2001, but they have been noting.
Pause. Can we, before we get to Axios?
Yes.
Sorry, I want to take
go ahead.
this for Ruth listening back. I want to say this one. I want to say this quote before we get into the Axios thing.
Yeah.
So, to talk a little bit more about like the wages and the things at the bottom, there's some great quotes from this cat, William Spriggs. He's the AFL-CIO chief economist. I know, economists and all, but I thought this was really interesting and useful stuff. He says, the wages at the bottom have been going up the most. So if anything, the real wages for people at the bottom have been doing better than the real wages for people at the middle. Black people, low-income people, they need both. We need to keep striving for full employment because the unemployment rates for Black people are higher than the aggregate, but also low-income, particularly Black people, need goods and services that are affordable. So the way that we get inflation down is you lower demand. The way you lower demand is you kick people out of work. You lower their income. If you happen to be one of those people who keeps their jobs, then you're a winner. And if you're one of the ones who we decide the rest of us need lower prices, you lose. And what frightens him in this, he says, what frightened me in this drumbeat about inflation is you're admitting that this is how inflation gets fought. And this isn't his quote, but with sacrifices. Yeah,
the sacrifice ratio. And also, we're turning the economy into a zero-sum game.
Are we turning the economy into a zero-sum game, or has it always been rollerball out there?
I mean, capitalism has always been a zero-sum game.
Right. And
at the end of the day, yeah.
This is the stuff that really lays bare how inequitable and unsustainable the system is.
And how manufactured it is.
Yeah, man. Talk about some GMO type stuff. We're like, yo, the way that we're gonna make it okay and affordable is by cutting out people's jobs. I've been going through the stories about this and the data, and I completely cram to understand. It does not make sense to me that the way that we make a stronger economy is by having less people have jobs. I know, no, I mean, like, I get it on like this real creepy level. If less people can afford a thing, then they can't charge the high prices for it. But, whoo, that's cold-blooded.
That's cold-blooded. That's too much.
So let's get back into the stats since we're being all cold-blooded. Axios has this really great article that talks about the way that these things break down.
Yeah. So they started doing this in 2021, so it's very new. And what's interesting about it is they thought through inflation not as in aggregate, right? The consumer price index is like on average, like has inflation gone up or down across like all industries, across all sectors, just like people spending money, right? Has it gone up or down? And so while that number is high right now, it doesn't tell us the full story. And so what we saw in the article was that they not only divided it across like different types of goods, right? We're talking about gas prices, we're talking about food and groceries, we're talking about rent, we're talking about housing, right? But they also divided it across racial lines.
Yay. What do you mean they divided across racial lines? What happened? How did we figure that out?
Am I doing this part?
Oh, you were leading, so I was like, oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
My bad. I was queuing up the song while you were on that text, so I was like, keep talking.
No, sorry. I thought because you had looked this up, so I thought I was just doing the beginning.
Okay, no, I can lead it too.
Yes.
What did you say?
I think I'm really hungry too, so.
We're almost done with this.
I know. Let's finish. I didn't even read the Derek Hamilton part yet, actually.
It's all good. We only have to use it if we feel like we need to.
Okay, yeah. How long have we been going?
Just over 24 minutes.
Okay, yeah.
With a little bit of
cutting, yeah. So I think if we get through Axios, then I think we're good, actually. It's kind of been long.
Okay, yeah. So
can we just have you do the whole Axios part? Because I'm not as familiar with it.
Oh, man, but I really loved the thing where you were talking about the verticals and how to break it down.
Sure. Okay. I feel like I did it better the first time.
You did. So can we take 3, and if you set that up, then I will carry?
Yeah, or we could take the first, the version that I did, and then you can go in.
That sounds good.
Okay, cool. Because you said before we go into the Axios thing you wanted to, but I did talk about those verticals.
Yeah,
I think that was
interrupted
good.
You.
It's okay. No, those quotes are really good, though. So I think, talking about now going into like, so I talked about the verticals, and then you can go into like the actual details.
Okay. So the verticals are kind of the stuff that we've already been talking about, where we mentioned that if your population spends more money on gas, then when gas prices rise, then it's going to affect you. That's people who are in rural areas who are drivers, and those ones who are dealing with that.
Yeah, or lower income people who work in a city but can't afford to actually live in that city.
Exactly. So what they started doing was it's similar to your Facebook profile stuff, where they're like, we're just collecting these things that people from this group have tended to buy in these large numbers. That's why I'm saying that it's very new stuff and they're not sure. They actually posit when you read the report that it's all based on, they think that it might be as much as twice as much as they're reporting right now, but they don't have anywhere near the data to figure that out.
That tracks, though, because the unemployment rate for Black Americans has historically always been twice the rate of white Americans.
Right.
So
one thing that they found in particular for Latino Americans, they spend a bigger portion of their money on transportation. That's buying cars and that's filling with gas. And those, huge spikes. So for that population, there is no relief from inflation. It's getting worse and worse, and it doesn't matter that gas prices have been going down if they still need to buy a car, and cars are still really expensive and hard to find.
Interest rates for borrowing money for cars is still high, right?
Mm-hmm. And as you're saying, Black people don't own homes in this country. We have low home ownership rates.
It's the same level that it was in the 1960s.
So when rents are rising and getting worse, then it makes it completely... we didn't talk about this on the other show, but I found this out recently about rent and black people. This is just like, I guess, a tea time kind of moment about why stuff is bad for everybody. But let me finish saying this thing about black folks and housing. We're renting because we're not able to buy, and we're spending a huge percentage. I don't have the stat in front of me, but I think it was something like close to 2/3 of in some cities of our salaries, of our incomes on rent. It's terrifying. And I want to give a shout out to black people for being able to get through this. Everybody else who's not black, you know that you have anti-blackness to thank for paying your security deposit. You know, security deposits weren't a thing back in the day. It was illegal to have a security deposit. And it was like, you know how usury was considered bad. In fact, you could pay your rent until the end of the month because, you know, you weren't done living there. So you can keep on paying the thing.
Just like you don't get paid for your work until after you've done it, right?
Exactly. But after Reconstruction, folks were like, we don't want black people living up in these places. So they started making these barriers. And one of them that they made was, well, you got to pay before you even start the month. And again,
rent's due on the 1st, which everyone knows rent's due on the 1st.
But that wasn't the case. But now it is, right? And these black folks, I mean, again, shout out. It's like they went and did it and said, look, we got it. Money is here on the 1st. So they said, more barriers. You need a deposit because we don't trust you. And nowadays, no matter your ethnicity, you could be white, blonde hair, blue eye. But when you show up in New York City, you are paying first, last, deposit, maybe a little extra bribe just to get your thing in there.
Broker fees.
Yeah, all of this stuff that all comes from people being like, we don't want black people to have a shot. This is why inflation is more of a problem for black folks, to Latino folks, for their closeness to blackness, for Asian people who are of a darker skin complexion and come from poorer countries because all the aggregates of those are skewed, and then eventually for everybody else because white supremacy don't care about you even if you white.
Okay, we need a song after that.
Yeah, you know, real quick, I wanted to mention, I also read this article with Derek Hamilton, who we love and is really dope peoples, and he was talking about how this stuff comes from laws. And there are laws that were meant to protect us that, again, got watered down. There's the Humphrey Hawkins Full Employment and Balanced Growth Act of 1978, which was aimed at maximum employment in the context of price stability. They've been working on this for decades now about this balance. And there have been people who've been like, look, we need to make sure that people are able to work because that's the most important thing. And I think it's really important. We've been saying a lot of doom and gloom stuff. So before we get out of here and we start playing some music, I want to talk about what we can do and where we can advocate. And I really appreciate Derek talking about this historical stuff. Look at the act and what it started to provide a framework that people needed to have employment. And he's currently advocating for some sort of jobs guarantee. I know that like universal basic income, it's fraught with peril. People are confused about, well, how do you guarantee jobs? How do you make that a thing? And if you guarantee people jobs or just give people money, other things are going to be more expensive. But the real is two things. People need money and people need purpose. And I guess the third thing, people need to be left alone from like, oh, do you have a job? You don't deserve this.
Yeah.
So if we have something as simple as a guarantee, a right to work, to be able to contribute, to be able to do something, then one, you have some purpose and you've got something you're doing. Two, you have some money so that when inflation goes up, goes down, does all of the wild, whirlwindy stuff that we described, you at least have a voice and can make decisions in that matter. And I think if we're going to figure out what we're going to do about inflation on a systemic level and even like what we can do about this on a personal level is making sure that humans are able to get employment, are able to get what they need. So that means in big businesses, we need to raise wages. That means in the smaller area, and to my artists, I know a lot of artists get down with us, we need to make industry out of the things that we're doing and not allow folks to bully us into this idea that creation of art, that education, that helping our fellow person is just a hobby.
Yeah, and for anyone who's like, oh, well, the free market will just figure it out. Everything will work itself out. When people start throwing around terms like sacrifice ratio, there needs to be intervention there to actually prioritize the worker and to prioritize humanity over sacrificing for profits.
Yeah. Again, remember, sacrifice ain't nothing but a murder. We don't need a free market. We just need free people. Then we can go to market.
Now we should go to a song.
Now let's go to a song, right? Now I feel much better. Now we're going to go to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Little southern vibes for you for an artist named Sonny Miles with a song called Inflate. I like the album cover has egos with the Ghostbuster slash in front of it. We're not inflating egos. We're inflating our prosperity.
I love it. I love
All right.
it.
Yeah. I forget that I don't have to do a sign off anymore. I was like, what am I signing off with? And I was like, oh yeah, I don't have to.
One.
Okay. We could even cut. Right. That was more messy than I thought.